The next trace mineral we'll discuss is copper. It is a component of various enzymes. It's involved in the regulation of neurotransmitters, connective tissue synthesis, and also immune function. We find it in a variety of foods, including liver and shellfish, also plant-based sources such as nuts, seeds, lentils, and soy products, and also dark chocolate. We've got the needs listed here, but you're not expected to remember them. Here we see our food sources of copper. You can see several sources which provide much more than 100% of the RDA. Now, copper deficiency is rare, but when it occurs, it will result in altered iron status, impaired growth, abnormal collagen formation, increased blood cholesterol, as well as increased infections. Keep in mind also that there's an interaction between copper and zinc. Zinc intake can lead to the binding of copper even when copper intake is low, which would typically enhance absorption. So remember that competing element going on there. Excessive amounts of zinc could lead to decreased or even deficient levels of copper. Now, toxicity is also possible, and while it is still not very common, toxicity can occur. We most often see it in people with Wilson's disease, which is a genetic disorder, and it leads to excess storage of copper. And you can see here some of the varied consequences of Wilson's disease. And one of them is this copper deposits in the cornea of the eye. So just some examples. Oh, we're going to just briefly touch on manganese. We've just got one slide on this trace mineral. We find it in whole grain cereals, nuts, legumes, leafy greens, and tea. So primarily we find this in plant-based sources. Again, you don't need to know the needs, but here is a good sampling of some foods high in this nutrient. Now we're going to spend some time talking about iodine. Iodine is found in saltwater seafood as well as seaweed. It's found in iodized salt, and that is a primary source of iodine in the diet for Americans in particular. Dairy products are also a good source. Plant-based foods can provide iodine, but only if the soil contains iodine. So depending on where those plants were grown, the amount of iodine in the food can vary really greatly. Iodized salt is not typically used in processed foods or specialty salts. So to ensure that you are getting adequate iodine in your diet, especially if you don't consume a lot of seafood or dairy, you may want to think about using your kind of typical iodized salt at least some of the time in your cooking. Bioavailability of iodine will be decreased by a group of factors known as goitrogens. That includes a lot of plant foods, and you can see them all listed here. I don't need to read all of them out to you, but it's just something to be aware of. Here you can see, again, some foods that provide iodine. Note that one of the highest is iodized salt. In just 1 teaspoon, you get well over twice as much as you need in a day. Now, seaweed is even a lot higher than that, but if you are not in a culture where you eat seaweed regularly, then iodized salt tends to be the place that you get the majority of your iodine, which can lead to a goiter, iodine deficiency or toxicity. If you've read the book, then you know the answer is actually both. We'll come back to that in a moment. Let's talk first about functions. Iodine is an essential component of thyroid hormones, and it is critical for normal metabolism. It's involved in basal energy expenditure, macronutrient metabolism, as well as the brain and nervous system development and growth. Here's a little bit more information about iodine deficiency. Goiter, we saw a picture of that earlier, but also decreased metabolism, and iodine deficiency in the mother when she's pregnant can lead to, in the baby, low birth weight, neurological disorders, poor physical development, and something that is known as cretinism, which is characterized by severely impaired mental development as well as loss of hearing and speech, a shorter stature, and also muscle spasms. So you can see why getting adequate amounts of iodine in the diet is such a concern for health practitioners around the globe. And to kind of further highlight that, you can see here that large portions of the world are impacted by moderate to mild iron deficiencies. And, so let's talk a little bit also about excess intakes of iodine. Again, you don't need to know the numbers here, but when the upper limit of 1,100 milligrams per day is exceeded, there are concerns for hyperthyroidism, goiter again, autoimmune thyroid disease, as well as thyroid cancer. Next, we will talk about selenium. In foods, selenium is found in, again, varied amounts depending on how much was in the soil. Best sources tend to be seafood and meats, as well as some cereals and grains. Again, we've got dietary needs listed here. You won't need to know those numbers. Another chart to give you an idea of some foods that are high in selenium. Functions. Selenium is a component of about 25 enzymes and proteins. It is involved in a component in antioxidant enzymes, and it is involved in converting T4 to T3, which are thyroid hormones. Here we see an example of selenium's role as an antioxidant, and that is as a component of glutathione peroxidase. You can see here it spares vitamin E from becoming oxidized by free radicals. Now we'll move on to talk about chromium. So the functions of chromium may include enhancing insulin action, promoting glucose uptake, and normalizing blood sugar levels, although this is there's still research remaining on that. In terms of sources and recommendations, you can see, again, this is another nutrient with a variety of sources. We've got some plant-based sources. We've got some examples here of some veggies and grains, also animal sources like egg and dairy and poultry, and then also red wine is a source of chromium. And now we're going to go on and talk about fluoride. So what is the function of fluoride? And what is fluoride added to in North America? Let's start with its role in preventing dental caries or cavities. That is probably fluoride's best known function. It is also believed that fluoride is important in maintaining the health of teeth as a whole, as well as bones. And fluoride is added to water. You've probably heard of fluoridated water in North America, although you can also find it in tea, seafood, and seaweed. Here you see data on how much of the population in each of the states in America how much of that population is served with fluoridated water, has fluoridated water in their homes. So you can see that the vast majority of the population provides 50% or more of the population is receiving fluoridated water. There are some states that are starting to kind of push back, and bills are being passed into law to unfluoridate the water or take the fluoride out. But in most places, this is still considered a public health breakthrough to provide fluoride in the water to ensure adequate intake. So when we talk about fluoride deficiency, we see that increase in dental caries. But this slide, and I'm realizing that the title is a little confusing, but documents the potential effects of excess intake of fluoride. And it, in an acute intake, can be life-threatening. You can see symptoms starting at vomiting, diarrhea, sweating, but leading to convulsions and even coma. Chronic excess intake of fluoride, which is usually a lower level, but over time can lead to this mottling or discoloration of teeth. And you can see, in comparison to normal teeth, how you get this mild and then more moderate and severe discoloration. This table I know is a little bit small, but if you look at it in your book, table 15.5, you see this nice summary of the trace minerals, including their major functions, deficiency, risks, the amounts required, but although you don't need to know those, but also good sources and potential toxicity symptoms as applicable. So a great overview. So that might be an easy way to review some of the major details about each of the trace minerals. And so I encourage you to take a look at that in your book. We will end this recording here and wrap up the chapter in the next recording.